Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, everyone is doing well. My name is Dr. Lawrence A. Rasheed. As my brother would say, the A stands for all good, but that's what he says. I can't say that. But I am so happy to be here for our second annual Black Mentoring Day. So I am the African American student faculty, student coordinator program, BSU advisor, and yada yada yada. But y'all didn't come to hear me because we have a great lineup in store for you. Again, I'm just pleased that we're able to bring you this mentoring day virtually, this MLK mentor day virtually this year. And hopefully, God willing, next year we'll be able to do it in person. Um, so before we get into it, I want to recognize the brainchild behind this particular event. It's the late Brother Philip Jackson out of Black Star. So I always like to, pay homage to our ancestors, since he's passed on. And again, Black Star is still doing a lot of great work around parent mentoring, so on and so forth. So definitely, if you want to know more about the organization, look up Black Star, based out of Chicago, doing tremendous work. So with that being said, we're going to go on with the program. I would like to acknowledge this next speaker coming up. He's, you know, he's my predecessor. He's my mentor. He's the person that I go to, dealing, trying to navigate this space, the Pacific Northwest of Eugene, right? He's a person that means a lot to me, not just to me, to many of us here on this call, who's just, speaking of mentoring, he's mentored so many of us. But before I pass the mic to him, I hopefully we can see this. I want to be able to give this to him soon, but this is the award that he received at our MLK event. He was our BSU Service Award winner of this year. So congratulations, Mr. Evans. Hopefully I can get this to you soon. Maybe we could have breakfast or something, with the COVID kind of restricts that. So we have a bunch of winners this evening, and we're going to get to another sister who won from the city as well, MLK award. So I'm just looking forward to it. So I'm going to be quiet right now, and I'm going to pass it off to Mr. Evans. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Lawrence. And my job here tonight is to welcome all of you to this mentoring event. I'm really anxious to hear from Mrs. Sankara-Jabar for a couple of reasons. I'm anxious to hear her message, but also that she is a fellow Buckeye Ohioan. I grew up in Cleveland, so you're a home girl. You're a home girl. Let me say a couple of things, and I'll be really brief. I want to talk a little bit about mentoring. I'll tell you, someone walked up to me, this had to be 10 or 15 years ago, after an MLK event. And this person, as he usually does, he has a lot to say, and at the same time, nothing to say. So he said to me, he said, well, you've done this and you've done that and put together celebrations and this kind of thing. And, what's going to happen? Who's going to come after you? And I said, what are you doing? That was my response. What are you doing? How are you setting example, not only for your 5 children, but setting example for all of the children in this community, and particularly our African American children? This is about 2 things. It's about knowing your history and understanding the legacy that you leave for the next generations that come after you. My 3rd great grandmother was a slave. And I found in the slave records registry in Virginia, my great grandmother's name, who owned her. It was a family by the name of Kellys. and what year she was born in. And I also saw the record of when she was sold to somebody in South Carolina. So in those days, do you know how they moved slaves? They didn't have wagons, you know, they didn't have trains or any other kind of transportation like that. Trains were available, they didn't use them. You walked from Virginia to South Carolina through all kinds of weather. Men were chained together. Sometimes women were chained, sometimes they weren't. And I look back on her and a legacy she left generation after generation in my family, and fully understand where I have come from, where we all have come from, and that we need to appreciate the mentorship, even if they're not with us or not alive now, of the people that came before us that we are connected to by DNA and blood. We have to set an example for our children, because if we don't, they don't know where to go or which way to go. And in this community, some of the statistics that were prevalent 20, 30, 40 years ago are even more prevalent today. So I'll give you one that may surprise you or may not surprise you. I'm not sure if you know that 50% of the African-American boys in the Eugene school district do not graduate on time, if they graduate at all. We can't afford to do that. My grandparents, great uncles, aunts, you know, they were prevented from going past the third grade. That's wrong. And if we've got the door open or even cracked right now, we need to take advantage and go through it. But we also need to understand what we need to do to be able to get in positions of leadership and power. And my mother was one of those people that was insistent on it. She was a teacher. She was a college graduate, of course. My dad graduated from high school when most Black boys didn't graduate from high school. So they saw in me the dreams and the hopes that they had for themselves that they could not realize in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. So I just want to put that on your minds. You know, I'm gonna close my mouth and go away. I'll still be on this call. I'm interested to see you know what happens in our speaker. And congratulations again to Linda Hamilton, our MLK award winner for 2021, my good friend. And I'm really looking forward to a very interesting and educational and inspirational event this evening. So good luck and goodbye. I'll be here, and you know, any questions or anything you have for me, I'm more than willing to answer. So let me turn this back over to Dr. Rasheed, and he will move through the next part of the program.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Evans. Really gracious of you to take some time out of your busy schedule. So right now we're going to get into a video by a good friend of mine by the name of Jasiri X, and it really captures, you know, it undergirds what we're going to be discussing today, and it's called Babies, and we're going to get into that right
now. It inspires the baby's question. What's that?
How can we
as a community, positively affect the lives of black men so that black men can continue to positively impact the world.
Can I ask my question first, please? I want to ask you a quick question. How can we hold ourselves accountable when we don't know why we think the way that we think? The first thing is we cannot be held accountable if we don't know what's wrong with us.
But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh.
No child left behind from being profiled. No smiles in every picture, pitching coke vows. Imagine babies being born with a black mask and a bullseye birthmark on our black ass. While Officer Loman shot to mid that fast. 400 years of fear appeared in the gap blast. They ain't tell us we be murdered by the policia. Ooh, child, they said things were gonna get easier. They ain't tell us we be crucified in the media. Turned into a hashtag highlights on Wikipedia. The rich get greedier, the poor more needier. The hood seedier, lock us up instead of freeing us. Who speaks for us? We ain't listening when you preach to us. So concerned when we can only learn what you teaching us. If love is a lap dance and hip hop is rap bands, our babies, they don't stand a fat chance. Damn.
But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh.
Is there a childhood for black babies? Criminal lives, their birth, they called us crack babies, that's crazy. But we ain't never heard them talking about a meth child. White supremacy means always having the best child. Why they hand us a death style with a fresh smile? Man, tell me how to protect child from projectiles. We need God to bless a child with a vest now. How we being raised if all of our days are letdowns? See, we inherited ideals that our parents lived. Taught us to go to war and treat us like we terrorists. Then act all shocked when it's babies we burying. But killing for what you want is just being American. They teach us to worship Jesus but curse his features. But whitewashing the Savior just made them the worst believers. Then point to the flag and tell us to pledge allegiance to a place they still treat us like a stillborn fetus. Believe it.
But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh. But no one stopped to think about the babies. Oh.
Again, that was Brother Jasiri X. Deep Brother does a lot, you know, for all of us. But he's, you know, maybe we could get him down here sometime soon, but he's really, really impactful. And that song was very powerful, right? You know, when we're talking about the babies, you hear me use that term a lot, like, you know, who really cares about the babies, right? And so when he and I were conversing and he said, I got a song called Babies, I'm like, really? And so that was really on point. So I'm not going to keep babbling. I'm going to bring somebody, you know, another person near and dear to my heart, who, you know, I endearingly call her my auntie. You know, those of us in the community, you know, when you call somebody your auntie, that you have some reverence and respect for her, right? And so, you know, Mrs. Linda Hamilton, she really has, you know, an interesting perspective because she works in law enforcement and she's also on the school board for the 16 districts here. So she has, you know, sometimes she pushes, well, she does push back on a lot of the injustices and a lot of the racial unrest and all these different things that happen in our schools and pathologize our young people, and especially our young Black youth, right? And so, really glad that she's able to be here with us. Mr. Evans already, gave her a shout out, and she's a winner. We like DJ Khaled here. All we do is win. So we got this sister who also won, from the city, recognized her finally, for all of her many contributions that she's made over the years. And so, without further ado, we're gonna bring in my auntie, Mrs. Linda Hamilton. Take it away, auntie.
Thank you, Dr. Rasheed. I want to thank you for having me on here tonight. Oh, I tried to push it. Anyways, thank you for having me here tonight. And thank you and Greg, LCC. I have to say for the longest when Dr. Rasheed got here, I called him Greg because Greg's like a mentor to me as well. Greg have mentored many Blacks in this community. But I'm so happy of what's going to be discussed here tonight around mentoring our young Black males. And I mentor both Black males and Black females. I have my husband here tonight too, who's listening and watching. He was with state police and have a lot of background experience and working with juveniles as well in education. So I'm elected here for the 16 school districts as the only African-American Black female. But I want to share a little bit further back with my experience, very short, the reason why I have an interest in juvenile reentry. I did adult reentry because I worked at the Oregon State Penitentiary here in Oregon. I worked at the Oregon State Penitentiary, Oregon State Correctional Institution, and Mill Creek Correctional Institution. That is a maximum men prison, a minimal men prison, and a medium men prison. So I don't work them all men's prison institution. And when I first came here for Louisiana, I wondered, I said, where's all the Blacks? And I went and toured the Oregon State Penitentiary in 1987. March of 1987, April of 1987, I was working there at the Oregon State Penitentiary. But I quickly found out where the Blacks were here in Oregon. They were locked up at the state penitentiary. So I've been in this field 33 years, going on 34 in April. So I've seen the need for us to reach out and help our young juveniles. I said I have 33 years dealing with adult now, it's the juvenile. So I have this juvenile mentorship going, starting. I've been mentoring for some years, but I recently got interested in mentoring young juveniles that are incarcerated because I was at the juvenile courts one day, believe it or not, true story. An attorney came up to me who used to be a prosecutor, and he's an attorney now. And he says, Linda, he said, I got this 12-year-old little Black male boy locked up here, and I can't find nowhere for him to go. He has no place to go. They don't want him back at the home that he was at. And I thought Daville was kidding me. That's the attorney named Daville. I thought he was kidding. I was like, you kidding me? 12 years old, you kidding me? And he said, no, I'll take you down in detention where he is. And due to that, I worked parole and probation in the county, and I had access, ID and everything. We went down into detention. But I don't work in the detention at the juvenile. I'm in the adult parole and probation. So he took me down in the detention. Sure enough, 12-year-old little young Black male sitting in there. We had a conversation, and he was locked up because he really had no home to go to. He had a little habit of starting fires and whatnot. And the home he was at, they didn't want him back, and that foster parent had brought him up from California. So I thought about that. And of course, I had a conversation with him talking about structure and what he needed to do. And he thought I was strict. He said, oh man, she too strict. And I thought, oh boy, so he really do need some structure in his life. But I say that to say we're in the right direction on reaching out. We need more programs around reentry. I got involved in the school district due to the school to prison pipeline. So this is my second term for being elected for all 16 school districts. There's only 2 of us here elected for all 16 school districts, and I'm one of them. So I look forward to listening to the speaker tonight, look forward to engaging more in community reentry And I want to say to everyone, thanks, thanks, thanks. And as Dr. Rasheed say, our babies, stop, think about the babies. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Auntie. Thank you. So what I want to do right now is bring on this 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 young brother who is new to the area, and I'm just pleased that we're going to do a little virtual meet and greet of this young brother by the name of Jaelen Barnett, who's going to be working with us within the Lane ESD, and I could let him speak to that a little bit more, but I'm just extending welcome and whatever I could do, whatever we could do. I'm pretty sure you have a multiplicity of people that want to help you. And again, we're just so happy to have you here. And again, let's turn our attention to Mr. Jaelen Barnett. Thank you, Jaelen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rasheed. Good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is Jaelen Barnett. I'm originally from California. I got a bachelor's degree in Africana Studies from Cal State Dominguez Hills. I got my master's in curriculum and instruction from the University of Maryland. And I also was at the Howard University in the educational psychology program, studied as a doctoral student for a couple of years before transitioning into this program. So um, within my time in my educational journey, I definitely believe that mentorship and knowing how to navigate the system is what allowed me to continue, and it also forced me to kind of break down different barriers that I seen during my time at the University of Maryland. I was the only African American in my program, the only African American student in the department. So it kind of weighs on you and forces you to get creative with how you're able to navigate that space. So I took a couple of notes in terms of mentoring and things that I think are important and things that students, African American students can do, Black students, students of color can do to not only set themselves apart, but help them to kind of move up in the ranks and, ultimately graduate, because that's the whole point, graduated from college. So seeking out support that you need, creating an elevator pitch so that people know who you are, what you're about, and why you're interested in connecting with them. Networking is extremely important. You don't meet good people by chance. Like, Dr. Rasheed, I didn't meet him by chance. I met him through networking, and that allowed me to then get connected a bit more with the Eugene community. Don't be afraid to ask for what you seek. You never know who a potential mentor knows. Be authentic and genuine, because that'll go a long way. Familiarize yourself with colleges and programs that are strong in terms of the major that you're interested in, and familiarize yourself with the HBCUs. It's interesting though. At the beginning, there was that shirt or that slogan, "Education, not incarceration," and I have that sweater. But today I'm rocking the Support Black Colleges sweater. So repping for the HBCUs. But I think it's just really important especially for students on the West Coast and students who are in areas that aren't heavily populated with Black folks, to be aware of those things and understand how you know it might seem like it's difficult, but it can really be easy. It just depends on who you know, and doing the work that you need to do to get involved. So yeah, I'm definitely excited. I'm at Lane ESD now as a data and evaluation coordinator. And in that position, I basically will focus on looking at students, African American students, students who are experiencing extreme poverty, English language learners, and foster and homeless youth, and figuring out ways to engage them more within the community. So, I would definitely love to connect with all of you on the panel. And if anyone has any questions for me, please feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, I'm gonna end it here, and again, thank you for this time and this space. And yes, I appreciate you all very much. And I look forward to connecting with you all in the future.
Thank you, Brother Barnett, for that, and look forward to working with you very shortly. There's going to be a lot of collaboration, and you have a great crew over there, the Lane Navigators, and what Sister Johnson's doing. So you're going to do well in your capacity, I'm sure. So at this time, what I like to do, and I don't want to butcher this, but I want to get through this because this is important. So I would like to introduce our keynote, right? And this, this is the formal introduction, but this is my sister, right? So Zakiya, or Mrs. Jabbar, want to give her husband a shout out too, my brother. All right. So she's a national director of activism at Brightbeam, the parent organization of Education Post. She is the co-founder of Racial Justice Now, and most recently served as the national field organizer at the Dignity School campaign. Zakiya came to organizing, advocacy, and policy work organically as a parent, pushing back on the harmful school discipline policies that disproportionately impact Black students, and we probably could argue Black males, right, and their families. Zakiya organizing and advocacy acumen has led to a significant policy changes at the local and state level in the state of Ohio, which Mr. Evans was referencing earlier. Since then, Zakiya has worked in communities all across the country, sharing tools, strategies, and skills with Black parents to shift education policy into practice, which is very important, right? Zakiya has been named to the inaugural Power 50 Leadership Fellowship for Women of Color with Community Change and Community Activist Fellowship with Wayfinder Foundation. Zakiya is the preeminent thought leader, I concur, in racial education justice and has received numerous awards. In her free time, Zakiya enjoys traveling and spending time with her husband and 2 children. And I got a chance to meet the sister maybe 2 years ago up here in Portland. And she and I are good friends with a lot of mutual people. We have a mutual, we call her our jig and a mentor, our sister, Deborah Watkins, who's very inspirational, and we could say a whole lot about her, and our brother Dr. Tommy Curry and Tia San. So we share a lot in common, but you don't want to hear about what we share, you want to hear from the sister. So without further ado, show some love for my sister Zakiya.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. This is an honor to be here to speak to each and every one of you tonight. I've been inspired listening to the amazing work that's happening in Oregon. I have to say, and I'm not sure if I shared this with you, Dr. Rasheed, my husband and I both were married before. And so we have children from previous marriages. And so my stepchildren actually live in Beaverton. And yeah, right outside of Portland. And so I've been out to Oregon for that reason for several times. And similar to you, Ms. Linda, when I got there, I was like, where are the Black people? So when you said they was all in the penitentiary, I was like, oh, that makes sense. So anyway, thank you for that introduction. I wanted to just start by centering us, right? I love to center us, especially in the spirit of Dr. King. This is titled the Dr. King Mentoring Day. And I wanted to share with you all my favorite quote by Dr. King. Is not the one that we always hear, I have a dream. He was so much more, everybody, right? We know that he was so much more than the I have a dream speech. In fact, some of his most prominent speeches, at least in my mind, happened later than that, right? Right before his assassination, particularly the year before, to the date of his assassination at Riverside Church in New York. He laid it out. War, poverty, and racism as the 3 ills. And I have to say that unfortunately, here in 2021, it is still the same issue. This quote here really centers how I do my work, right? In organizing, advocacy, and policy. He says on some positions, this is a because I listened to this speech. This is a response to a reporter asking him, well, you know, if you take a position on the Vietnam War, you know, you're really supposed to stay in civil rights. You shouldn't take a position on the Vietnam War. Won't you worry about losing your funding for the SCLC organization? Some of you might know about that. But he said in response, on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? And vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he and she must do what is in the best interest of the people and what his consciousness tells him that is right. That's how I do my work, y'all. And it doesn't make me very popular sometimes. As you heard in my bio, you know, I was able to start organizing and doing work in Dayton, Ohio. And I came to the work because of my own child, a little Black 3-year-old boy who was identified, right, in the school system already, 3 years old. They don't even wait until they get older. They target them when they're babies, right? The preschool to prison pipeline. And I was actually taken aback during that experience, but it activated something in me really deep because because for me as a child, I had a tough childhood. The brother let me know he was from Cleveland, so am I. I was born in Cleveland in the early 80s. And I'm not sure if you were there at that time, but during that time, for a lot of Black folks, we're getting caught up in America's so-called war on drugs, which we now know in retrospect was a war on Black people. And the crack epidemic impacted my family, personally, my mother and my father. And as a young toddler, I experienced so much trauma. And by the time I was 4, before ending up like that young man that you talked about, Ms. Linda, there's so many connections, ending up in foster care, it was my great grandmother from Beloit, Alabama, which is a small town right outside of Selma in the Black Belt. There's about 7 or 8 counties in South Central Alabama that are majority Black. And those were the counties, as a matter of fact, Selma and Dallas County is the county seat for Selma, where we know the modern civil rights marches started for voting rights in particular. And so I grew up with that in my bones, just in my family, right? And I reflected on that when I started organizing immediately as a response to what happened to my own child. I immediately started talking to other Black women who had sons in that school because I noticed that they didn't treat the little Black girls the same way as they did the Black boys. And the data shows us that, particularly in the state of Ohio. This was a earth-shattering statistic. We couldn't believe it. In fact, some of our allies actually questioned it because they thought it was a statistical anomaly, and it is. But 100% of the preschoolers who had been expelled from Ohio public preschools were all Black boys, literally 100%. And so that activated something in me. And when I started hearing the stories of those other mothers, I sat down, I started networking with people that I already knew in the community who I felt could help me. And one of those people was Dr. Vanelia Randall, right? She is a professor emeritus now from the University of Dayton School of Law. She also spent time in Oregon. She was a public health nurse in Oregon, and I believe got her law degree in Oregon. So many connections in this story. And when I talked to her, she encouraged me that we needed to just start an organization. We needed to start organizing, and we needed to take a systemic approach. My job was to do the legwork with the parents, with the families, collect the empirical data, the stories of all these families. And she went and did the data because she used her skills as a public health nurse or an MPA to disaggregate the data that all of the school districts have reported to the Ohio Department of Education. And we produced the first ever school discipline report card, not just in Ohio, but in the country. Now all kinds of organizations do it. And we were a little small grassroots with no funding. We literally are just organizing out of experience of one Black parent who then was activated to bring in all of the masses of the other Black parents who had been experiencing these things for years. We ended up for the first time on the cover, on the front page of the Dayton Daily News. I didn't even know how significant that was at the time because it wasn't about that, right? It wasn't about vanity or being in the media or anything like that. It was simply because before us, well, I would say for at least a few years, no one was showing up to the school board meetings to hold school board leaders and the superintendent accountable to the children in the community. Black children make up the majority of Dayton public schools, but when we disaggregated the data, particularly Black boys, as Dr. Rasheed has pointed out, and this is why, and I'll share why mentoring is important as well. When we saw that the number one category of student that was pushed into the pipeline to prison, the three identifiers were Black, male, and quote unquote disabled. There's another phenomenon that we don't talk about. I see you shaking your head, Jaelen. You know I'm right. There's another phenomenon that we don't talk about very much within the school to prison pipeline, and that is the overrepresentation, particularly of Black boys that are identified as emotionally disturbed. They're identified as oppositional, defiant. These are very subjective diagnoses from jump. And some of these children are also oftentimes medicated. So much so, a lot of people don't know about this, but the outgoing Obama administration administered a, not an executive order, but guidance from the US Department of Education and the US Department of Justice saying, you cannot have Black children, Black boys overrepresented and identified as specially disabled. And see, I saw that in my work, particularly with my son. My baby was only 3 years old, and the teachers who are not qualified was telling me who they thought was an unsuspecting, ignorant parent who wouldn't know any better. Oh, you know, he probably got ADHD. We can have somebody take a look at him. I said, excuse me? They had the right one. I said, he's 3 years old. He's a baby. And I said, and furthermore, you're a teacher. When did they start giving y'all licenses to diagnose people? You see what I'm saying? And in my organizing experience, and this is something that I've had the opportunity to do. In fact, when I met Brother Dr. Rasheed, I was in Portland organizing with the Portland Parent Union. There are Black folks out there that's trying to organize and stop the school to prison pipeline. I'm so sorry to hear that in Eugene schools, 50% of Black males don't graduate. This is a national crisis. It is a national, and it's really a moral, and it's a stain on this country to this day that in 2021, we have not figured out how to educate all children without the systemic anti-Black racism that exists. And see, I can't be afraid to call it what it is. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it's really not about more training, right? It's really not. We have to get to a point, and I think now could be a good time, since many of the schools are online, we're in a pandemic, where we've got to, as a community, talking about mentoring, as a community, we have to get a lot more creative. This is the perfect time for us to go back to our little 2 or 3 room schoolhouses that we had to do before Brown to educate our children. And we educated them well. That's what's not talked about. Right? When you think about all of the greats that we hold up in history, right? America couldn't get to the moon without them kids, them young women who was educated in little 2 room schoolhouses. Think about that, right? This was 1954, not very long. And I must add that schools are actually more segregated today. There was a recent report that came out, I believe in 2019. Schools are actually more segregated today than they were in 1954, particularly in the big so-called liberal cities, New York City, it's that way, because you have all of the bifurcation with all of the different bureaucracies that usually white middle-class parents create to segregate within schools and also to segregate within communities. Where I live now, Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., this is considered one of the quote unquote best school districts in the country. But when you dig into the data and when you see how Black children are doing, when you see the school to prison pipeline numbers, Black children make up 1/5 of our school district. And it's a very diverse school district. In fact, children of color make up the majority of the school district here, because this is truly the United Nations of a community. There is all kinds of people here. Jaelen, you went to the University of Maryland, which is right down the street. You know what I'm talking about. And when I looked at that data, I said, oh, wait a minute, this is a progressive community, right? Oregon gets that flag too. Y'all are supposed to be progressive. This is a progressive community, right? Oh, we got Democrats everywhere, all on the county council. What is going on? Why are Black children being arrested at 50 times the rate as every other child in the school district for the SROs that are in school? That's the current campaign that my organization, Racial Justice Now, is working on, that my husband now works at and leads the work with other staff here, right? So this is a national issue. And I think where I believe that the mentoring, not just of young people, but of parents and entire families, we have to have a village approach. That's what I want to encourage us. That if you don't leave with nothing else I say tonight, seriously, is get into the mindset, especially now in a pandemic, parents and families, including us, who I would say, we're quote unquote comfortably middle class now, are finding very difficult days to figure out, how am I going to work online? And how am I going to support my children who are online? We need a complete shift in how we have been doing community over the last several decades. And it's really not foreign to us as African Americans. We know how to do this. Our grandparents did it. Our great-grandparents did it. They did it on the plantations. We figured out a way to be supportive of our children and of our families and communities. I see it happening already. I'm sure you all probably have mutual aid networks that have popped up to support families. We need a mutual aid support system now for education. Because let's be honest, these schools weren't educating Black kids before the pandemic. Can you imagine what's happening now online? I'm looking at the preliminary data. The work that I'm doing with the network that I'm with now at Brightbeam, we're looking at the data and saying, this is unacceptable. For the children who are already behind, I'm concerned that we're going to have a generation of illiterate children at much more higher numbers. Because I'm thinking about how our young people, kindergartners, first graders, second graders, how are you doing this online? It's not happening. You want to know how I know? I got a 6-year-old. We took her offline and just decided to homeschool her. And I can tell you, we're just doing the best that we can. Thankfully, we have the resources to buy curriculum to support her and all of that. But what I'm saying is, for those of us, which is the majority of Black folks, let's just be honest, the majority of us are working class or poor. And so for those of us who may have, and I'm not saying that we got it all like that, but those of us who have a little bit of extra resources should be finding ways to find those families in our community who need support and be a hand up. Not just, like I said, mentoring the children, but also there's a lot of single parent families who need support, both men and women. I'm thinking about the single parent who is also an essential worker, right? My heart goes out every time I go to the grocery store. The grocery stores here are unionized, so you can't tip them. But I want to just tip the grocery workers, because most of them look like me and you, where I live at anyway. And I want to thank them, because I know they left their children at home to come and go to work, right? So we can still have a grocery store open to go and get our food and other toiletries and everything that we need. but they have children at home that they can't oversee virtual learning that's falling behind. They may not even have other support. And so I'm thinking about that all in the context of the poverty that Dr. King talked about, right? The anti-Blackness and racism that we still live with. And there has to be more for us to think about in terms of holding people who we got out and voted for, because we got out and voted this the last election. Shout out to Black people, we did our thing, but now we need those people to step up for our community, right? We can't say, let's kick this down the line, or this is not important. We have to be able to demand that our community's needs, which are extremely huge. I will just say, I'll keep it that way. I've got to keep it clean. So when we, you laugh at me, Dr. She, but I'm serious because I see it. Washington, D.C., Jaelen spent time at Howard. You know, my husband grew up in Washington, D.C. He's from Washington, D.C. And by the time we moved back here, which has been 5 years ago, I love the area, but he was shocked at the gentrification. He would tell me, he was like, you would never see white people walking no dogs on 8th Street. Wow, right? And so where are those poor African Americans being pushed to? Where are they? You wanna know where they're being pushed to in DC? Tent encampments. Homelessness, this is something that we don't talk about. There's children and men and women, mostly African American. When you look at the data for homelessness, almost 50% of the homeless population are Black folks. Go to any city. Go to any city in this country, and I have traveled all around this country, East, West, Midwest, the Plains. I've been at all kinds of places, Miami, Oakland, and every time New Orleans, I was shocked. I thought New Orleans was affordable. It's in the South. But when I was like, what is going on? And I'm in the social justice space, right? That's why that quote by Dr. King means so. That's why I started off with that. Because when I see stuff like that, and I'm going to a conference that's about social justice, and we're talking about things in silos, it concerns me. Because we don't live single issue lives. When we talk about children who are exhibiting behaviors at school that may be challenging, because we know what's happening. We're living in a challenging society, but why do the children pay the brunt of the discipline, of everything that's happening when we have people in power who could simply make changes to policies and practices that would improve the material conditions of our communities? That's what Dr. King was talking about in the later days. I so wish that we had a prominent African-American figure in this day to speak that kind of truth to power. I know there's many grassroots folks, including myself, there's many people, you have people on this call right now in their own communities who are speaking that truth to power, right? But we have to be willing to step up and to support them. So I want to leave a couple of things with you all, and this is something that has worked for me in my organizing. And someone mentioned it earlier. We have to lead with grace, with authenticity, and with love. Love is so important. It's not, see, when we talk about love, people usually jump right to the romantic. I'm talking about the kind of love that's considered agape love, right? Like this love for your people, love for people who are the least of these. That's what I feel like Dr. King represented, quite honestly. I feel like he represented that, and others represented that in the most prominent way. And I'm concerned that in some cases, in some of the more prominent movements, some of us have gotten away from that, the love for people who may not say things the way you think they're supposed to say them, or may not even show up in the space the way that you think they're supposed to show up in the space. The other thing is that we have to stop judging people based on exterior. I see that a lot as well in our movement, and also in how we deal with our young people, particularly the young people that are the most marginalized, the most misunderstood. If we led with that kind of grace, with that kind of love, when we interacted with a young person who we consider a problem or problematic child, then I'm going to tell you, I have seen children make a change when they know that the adult that is dealing with them, that's talking to them, loves them, or they know that cares enough about them. I'll share this experience with you. After that experience that I had with my son when he was in preschool, I was actually politicized by Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. If you've never heard of him, please look him up. He's still very much alive today. He's in Chicago, and actually he still does speaking engagements. He wrote a book in the early 80s called Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. I read that book when I was going through that situation with my son. That was in 2010. And I believe he wrote that book when I was a baby. And here we were in 2010, still dealing with the same issues that he was writing about in the 80s. And so one of the suggestions that he made in the book about how Black boys will be treated in education, particularly by white middle-class teachers, that's another book that he has written. I encourage people here to read his books. You should be able to, to get them at the library, or they should be able to find them reasonable on his website. I don't recommend Amazon to anybody. That's my own political stuff. However, one of the suggestions he made, and he also left his email in the book, was that look at single gender schools. So I don't know if Rasheed told you, but I tell the truth, right? Listen, that's how I do my work. And thankfully in Dayton at that time, we had single gender schools. We had the Dayton Boys Academy, and then we had the Charity Adams Early Girls Academy. Some of the history around the single gender schools actually came out of the research of Black scholars like Asa Hilliard, like Jawanza Kunjufu and others, Janice Hale, Dr. Janice Hale as well, who is now passed on, she's an ancestor. These were all Black educators and Black academics and Black thinkers who did the rigorous research to show the world what they knew worked for Black children. And I'm sorry to say that even here in 2020, I want to say 2017, DC, Washington, DC schools, even that late in the game, went to single gender schools with the support of the mayor at the time. And there was lawsuits filed by feminist organizations who said that it was unlawful. But even with it being backed up, and we know that this is something that will support African-American children, I'm going to finish my story because I'm going to tell you a lived experience of the fact of it. We have to still fight these issues in court for what's best for our children. To me, that's a travesty. To me, that's indicative of the kind of fights that we're still having to make sure that Black children have what they need and deserve to thrive, not just survive. We got to get to a point where it's okay for us to thrive in any environment. When I contacted Dr. Kunjufu, I did email him and I told him what was happening. And he asked me, he said, are there single gender schools in Dayton? You might need to take a look at the single gender school. And that's exactly what I did. Every time I tell this story, sometimes I still choke up about this experience. But I did. I put my son in a single gender school. He had an African-American male kindergarten teacher, y'all. That is like unheard of. Y'all know how many Black male teachers are in K through 12 education? Some schools is less than 1%. But it's abominable. So I had already had this experience with him in preschool, and the teachers were white women. When I put him in this school, I still had some fear, right? I'm putting him into another school, you know, let's see how this goes. I'm fighting like the pathologizing that had happened, not just to him, but also to me. These systems, let me tell you, these systems, they also pathologize parents. Y'all know y'all done heard some conversations with teachers talking bad about people, about these kids' parents. Or if you've been an educator, you just sat in that room in the teacher's lounge and heard some of them talk, you know it. That's not okay. Because when you dehumanize people, you're not treating them with grace and love. You're not treating them with grace and love. The first week at that school, I was waiting for an email, for a call, and it never came. So I called. I said, Mr. Burris, that's his name. I still remember him. He's still teaching in Dayton. I said, hello, Mr. Burris. I was like, I'm just calling, you know, I'm Amir's mom. That's my son's name. Just checking to see how he's going. He was like, oh, he's fine. He's one of my best students. Tears just began to flow on the phone. And Mr. Burris didn't know what had happened. He didn't know if he had said something wrong because I had been told that he was ADHD, that he was a problem, that he was problematic, all of this and that. But what the teacher at the preschool saw was a problem. What Mr. Burris saw was a young, bright, young leader in him. And he nurtured that. He told me he nurtured that in him. He saw him as very bright. And it's very interesting because when you look at the data, something I mentioned earlier, when you look at the data of the overrepresentation of Black boys in particular in these disability programs labeled as emotionally disturbed and oppositional defiant, 9 times out of 10, when there's a recommendation to the parent to get a second opinion and they actually test that child, a lot of times those young boys are gifted. But it's the teacher recommendation. See, a lot of this is starting from our educators. And that's also not popular to talk about, but I'm here to tell the truth because I think we have to tell the truth in order to get to where we need to go, family. Every single situation where I have talked to parents across this country, no matter what state, where I have had to mentor parents, help parents devise strategies and tactics and tools to support their children, knowing that they have a teacher that doesn't love them, knowing that they have a teacher that doesn't care enough for that child to ensure that that baby learns. And so I can't muzzle that. Anytime you have a demographic of teachers, and I always bring this up, over 80% of our teachers in this country, I'm sure it's more in Oregon, but in this country are white women. That's a fact. So we got a lot of work to do, family. There's a couple of strategies. Many people are doing it. I have a friend at the Center for Black Education. His brother name is Sharif El-Mekki. He was a Black male teacher in Philadelphia. You know him, Dr. Rasheed. Now, his whole goal is to increase Black teachers in our schools, particularly Black male teachers. They started a Black male teacher initiative. So that's something that's a tool and a resource for the people that are listening here today. If you're interested in increasing your teacher of color pipeline of Black teachers, you can contact that organization. They're based in Philadelphia. Dr. Sharif El-Mekki is the CEO. He's also the former principal and leader of the Mastery Charter School in Philadelphia, okay? Another resource for educators and for families is my former employer, the Dignity in Schools campaign. There's all kinds of resources on the website. There's a toolkit for parents who may want to organize in their local community and say, hey, I'm coming to the school board and we notice that there's this policy and we'd like to change it. Here's a toolkit that they can use to help them in that achievement, right? There's also, because number one, that's what we have to do. We have to increase teachers of color. We have to make sure that we have the right educators to teach our children. That we have to do that. The majority of our kids are still in public schools. Because I'm gonna be real with you, I'm about building independent Black institutions. I am about building, because that's the third thing I was gonna say is, especially now in this pandemic, we need to really be thinking about creative ways to build our own, whatever you want to call them, homeschooling pods or micro schools. There's all kind of little fancy names. I see a lot of articles have been written about rich people in upper middle class families. When the pandemic hit, they immediately used their resources and organized micro schools and pods. I'm sure you all have heard about it. I'm sure in whatever the rich areas are of Oregon, they got some out there too, trust me. But what's happening with our poor and working class kids? Are they just sitting in front of a computer 8 hours a day? That's not healthy. That's not even sustainable. I'm telling you from experience. Because that my son who was three at the time, now he's in 8th grade going to high school next year. And I can tell you that the virtual learning experience has not been a good one, right? I understand that's what we're doing now, but we have to force some creativity. And some of the creativity we cannot all put on institutions. This is time for us to come together in our own community. As I said before, many of these schools were harming Black children before the pandemic and not teaching them well before the pandemic. So this is a time for us, I believe, as a third strategy to build our own micro schools, particularly and crowdfund. We have to fund them ourselves. I think people get scared when I say that because I think we don't have an accurate understanding of history. History sometimes has been so romanticized. But you realize y'all got grandparents or great-grandparents that went to them 2-room schoolhouses and they not stupid, right? What I'm advocating for is not, it shouldn't be foreign, or we should, and poverty, let's just be honest, was worse in many cases back then than it is now. Arguably, you know, in this day and age, Black people have access, right, to more resources and wealth now than we ever have. And so this is why I introduced that as a strategy. It may not necessarily be a popular one, but I think it's something that we have to do, because when we take an accurate look at the data, when we take stock of the families that we talk to in our communities, and they're letting us know that my child just had an incident with a school resource officer. I'm sure you all have seen the news. Just yesterday in Florida, a police officer, a man, a big, burly man, slammed a Black high school young lady on concrete, knocking her unconscious on video. If you haven't seen that, Google it. It just happened 2 days ago in Florida. That is why Dignity in Schools, Advancement Project, the Alliance for Educational Justice, and a host of other national organizations, including grassroots organizations like Racial Justice Now, have been working to get the regular presence of law enforcement out of schools. And here's the thing, family, as I get ready to wrap up. This is not new. What is new is that young people have this. The police have been brutalizing Black people since their inception as slave catchers. This is not hyperbole. This is history, okay? They have been brutalizing Black bodies. We should not allow them to do this to our children. It's not okay. And I'm here to tell you, for the people who may be saying, well, what did she do? That's the wrong question. Because guess what? She didn't do nothing to deserve that. I'm sorry. A grown man. Now, would he have done it? Would he have done that to his daughter? Would he want somebody else to do that to his daughter? What about his mother, his sister, a woman that he loves? So why is it okay for him to do it to our babies? That's not okay. And it's not an anomaly. See, that's what I think sometimes when people see those videos, They think, oh, wow, that's really horrible, but I still don't want to take the police out of schools. Well, whose kids are you sacrificing? Because the data say they Black and brown. See, sometimes we have to watch the people who claim to be allies, but they not with us when we need them to be with us to do the right things. Our work has been so impactful. As I mentioned earlier, I live here in the state of Maryland. Our work has been so impactful here that we have finally got a package of police accountability bills introduced in the Maryland State Legislature just this year in January. I don't have enough time here tonight to tell you how hard that was. I want to say, similar to Oregon, Maryland is a deep blue state in terms of our state elected officials. We have a supermajority Democrats in the Maryland House and in the Maryland Senate. We do have a Republican governor, but we have a veto-proof Democratic majority in our legislature. And when I tell you the people who are supposed to be our allies, as African Americans, we vote for Democrats 9 times out of 10 when we head to the polls. It was the hardest thing with some of them to get them to wrap their minds around the brutality, even after the George Floyd video went all across the world. And we saw school district after school district after school district take police out of schools. We still had a hard time to even get the bill introduced. We finally got the bill introduced. I'll be speaking next week in front of the committee on Zoom to encourage our legislators to do the right thing, to do the right thing. We should never have to continue to see Black children, especially our children. If we don't protect our children, family, who will? This is up to us. We need mentors. We need every stakeholder, parents, teachers, right? School board members, superintendents. We need every stakeholder to come together to do what's right for all children. Because guess what? When you do what's right for Black children who unfortunately remain at the bottom of every indicator in some of the school districts across this country, you're lifting the rest of everybody else. I always say that to push back on people, say, well, we can't have special stuff for Black people. Well, y'all got special police officers that's doing special stuff to Black people. We specially suspended them more than everybody else. No, y'all got special stuff. We need to do some special stuff that's on the right side. That's what Dr. King said. It might not be popular, right? It might not even be expedient to some of these folks, but is it right? Y'all see why I started off with that? So many people quote Martin Luther King, a lot of legislators, because he's safe now. Think about it. When at the time of his death, he was one of the most unpopular people in this country at the time of his death. But now everybody loves him. So sometimes we have to remind people of some of the things that he actually said. And we have to use that as a light, as a torch for those of us who are doing this work now. Thank you all so much. I'm willing to stay as long as possible to, take any questions. Thank you so much, Brother Rasheed, and to all the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. I mean, there's so much that we could go into. We'll be on here until about, and I know I think you 2 or 3 hours ahead of us. So
3, yeah, it's late here.
Yeah, so
it's almost 10 o'clock Eastern time.
Yeah, I know my brother's like, listen, you got to get off, and the babies too. So I think there are a few questions, and I know some of the members on the panel. I know Brother Barnett had a question, but let's see, Brother Carter, if you could assist me, were there a few questions from the audience that they have for Sister Zakiya? All right, it's in the Q&A.
Oh, in the Q&A, okay, let me look.
Okay, and I can help you out.
All right.
So,
okay.
Hello, Mrs. Zakiya. That is my favorite quote of Dr. King as well. How do we get the elders in your community to work and assist with the next generation of leaders to have a village mentality? Right?
Yes, that's a great question, and I hope I answer this for you. I have to say that in my experience as an organizer, both at the national and the local level, I've actually had really good experiences with elders in my community. There have been times, particularly I would say with other traditional civil rights organizations, there have been some issues sometimes with sharing leadership and things like that. But I think that it's not about to me, it's not about necessarily forcing an issue or your will or something like that on somebody who may not be willing to rock with you on that issue, on one issue, but they may be able to work with you on another issue. I try as I said earlier, is try to lead with love and grace, particularly of our elders. I got to be honest with you. I was raised in rural Alabama, and I was raised by my great grandmother. I better have some respect, right? So I have a different view on that. I know that sometimes younger people, I would say younger than me, which are, what's that, Generation Z now? I forget all the generations, the ones that, like in my son's age group, the 13-year-olds up to like some of the 20-somethings. I know sometimes there's a different view from them when it comes to the elders. And I just think sometimes it's generational, but we have to figure out a multi-generational approach. Again, leading with just the basic principles of love and grace. And sometimes if it don't work out, don't force it. You keep on moving, right? You keep on, you find the people who are willing to roll with you on an issue. And trust me, once people see people rolling with you on an issue, once people see you win, because that's what happened with us. People thought we was crazy. Think about when we started organizing. This was during President Obama's first presidency, the first 4 years. And here come an organization called Racial Justice Now. Anybody remember what everybody was talking about when President Obama got elected the first time? Remember everybody said, oh, we post-racial. We done transcended race. So when we came out and said, we ain't transcended race. No, we want racial justice now. People thought we were crazy. But it was only when people started coming out and saying, no, this happened to me, or this happened to me. Or when people saw that we were getting the attention of legislators, then that's when the ranks blew up, when elders came to the table, allies came to the table, all kinds of people. So I just say, do your work. If you know that that's what's in you and that's what the spirit or whatever your higher power is leading you to do, you stand on that and you work with whoever you can, including elders. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, sister. That was from my brother, George Beverly Jr. Shout out George, doing this thing. So I wanted to get in some of our panelists that may have questions for you, and they may come in from the audience as well. But I think Brother Barnett had a question, and I know, Mr. Evans. So I want to get in because I could hog up the whole thing. We could talk about education forever, but it's not about me. It's about we, right? And so, so go ahead, jump in if you had a question. Take yourself off mute and jump in with the question for our sister, and I'll put myself on mute.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Zakiya. So it was crazy because you were talking about a lot of different things, and I had literally on my Instagram, I had posted that same quote when I posted a whole bunch of pictures that I had taken in Tennessee and in Atlanta of, different Martin Luther King monuments, but I literally used the same quote. So I was like, dang, that's crazy. And then you started talking about other books and authors that I needed to reach out or I needed to look up. And it was just, it made a lot of sense. So, the things that you were saying are very important. And it's just proof that I need to get on them because they're in my notes and my to-do list to get to. But yeah, so the question that I have was, how do you think we should go about creating a collective of educators, community leaders, and public health professionals, etc., to mentor children and adults across the country? Because we know it looks very different, depending on where you are. So I thought that that was important. And by mentorship, it doesn't necessarily just mean education, financial literacy, health literacy, just a whole bunch of things, law. So yeah, that was a question that I had. I know it was a kind of a loaded question, but
No, that's a really good point. And I think we are starting to see some of that happen organically in terms of, I think I mentioned some of the they're called mutual aid networks. That's really popped up in a lot of places since the pandemic has started. And I think even before that, we've had small community groups and for communities who still have community centers, right? Because there was a lot of places that it closed down community centers, but there's still some that are around that are, number one, they're safe places for elders to go, for young people to go. I think that's, clearly safety is important. But I think that at this moment, it's something that is extremely needed. I love the fact that you brought up the idea of financial literacy. That is something that I, in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, and I'm an adult, just realize how critically that is important for our community, and how we really need to be starting with young children, middle schoolers even. Because one of the things that I've noticed, and I was shocked that not my high school, I didn't even learn it in my college program, how wealth and how money actually works. And it's not, you don't build wealth from working. It's literally all kinds of different other strategies that the wealth crew, the wealthy people know about. And oftentimes they don't look like us. Let's be honest, because our ancestors were the commodities that they were gaining their wealth off of. So it can be a touchy subject, I know, for us. But one of the things that I would say that is a key ingredient, because you're right, that's going to look different geographically where you are, just the way organizing is, organizing, advocacy, and policy. I remember when I first started in this new role that I'm in, because I'm the national director for all of our activists in different cities. We have activists in Oakland, we have activists in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, here in Washington, D.C., and also in Chicago. And one of the things I had a chat with our CEO about is I said, activism isn't uniform. That's not organic. You don't use a top-down approach. You let the communities themselves figure out what the issues is that they care the most about, right? And let them lead. You're there to support. That's my philosophy. That's also something that Ella Baker had as a philosophy, who was another one of my sheroes. Yes. So I think that it's going to look different. I think one of the principles, the main principles, is to make sure, particularly for allies or people who are not indigenous to a certain community, because culture also looks different geographically. You want to make sure that you're coming in as a learner and not an expert. Black folks tired of that. Stop coming in people's communities, telling them what they need to do. So many people do that. I see academics do that. No shade, Dr. Rasheed, not you. But we can't have that. It has to be organic, and it has to be rooted in the culture of that particular community. That's the way that you organize and gain trust. Because the distrust that many of our, and we're seeing that now with the vaccine, there's a lot of distrust because people have done things to us, create the distrust, right? So that's what I would say. That's one of the main tools and ingredients that I would use, is that people have to be humble. You have to be willing to learn from people who you think may not be as educated as you. It's another one of my sheroes, Fannie Lou Hamer, said, whether you got a PhD or no D, we in this thing together. That's Fannie Lou Hamer.
I'm familiar with that quote. I just got one more thing to say, because you talked about Ella Baker.
Yes.
And you were talking about these, 2-room shacks. It automatically brought my mind to Freedom School, of course.
Yes.
So I was just like, oh, all right, you understand that, but Something that Ella Baker also mentioned back in the 40s was the biggest problems that we faced in our communities was poverty, police brutality, and
Yes,
the problems within schools. So those are
that's right.
like the top three ills of the community, and it's still present now. So yeah, I just thank you for bringing up Ella Jo Baker, because people don't know.
Yes, people don't know. You're right. Thank you, brother. We here.
We're gonna try to get another question, and then my brother, brother Hamilton had a question. But yeah, shout out to Ella Baker. Just, just real quick, what I really appreciate about Sister Baker is that she was a humble leader. She was a servant, so she didn't want all,
She didn't want the fame.
She didn't want that spotlight. She didn't want all that. She was about that work. You know what I mean? A lot of us want to get in front of the camera and everything, like, oh,
Right.
after this. She was like, no, let's do the work.
Let's do the work.
Promoting and passing the torch on to those other babies and doing that work. And we know about Sister Hamer. Listen, she said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And
That's right.
I feel that way today, especially with our
That's
babies.
where I'm at.
I'm like, man, they're going through this, and sometimes I weep. I'm like, man, this is messed up. I can't cuss either, sister, but you know what I want to say. This is messed up. But let me get another question from one of our panelists, and then I'm going to end with my brother Rick Hamilton's question, and then we'll wrap up. So any other panelists want to have a question for our sister as we're getting close to the top of the hour? If y'all don't, you know me, I could jump in there, but I want to hear from y'all. Everybody good? All right. So this is kind of like a comment / question. You mentioned, the formalization of Black independent autonomous schools. And I saw you, because I'm a fan, and I saw you were interviewing this one brother who, because there's several of these independent, not charter schools, but independent private schools, right? You got the one in Chicago, shout out to Zayax. We got the brother
Marcus Klein, in Chicago.
Yeah. That's the brother thing I was thinking about. So, and there's a lot of these schools on the horizon, the home school, like institutes and everything, doing this work. What would you say or suggest to a school or entity that's trying to go that route? What would you offer? What suggestion would you offer them?
Quite honestly, be good to yourself, be patient. Don't think you have to go in and have a whole bunch of money. Start small, right? If you got the heart, right? You got the drive and you got the will, you can do it. And I'm not suggesting to say that our children are like guinea pigs and that, just do whatever. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that what I've noticed that as a barrier for people who want to do this, like they literally have the heart, some of them have the skill set. We don't realize how many people we have in our network that we can tap for things. I'll give you an example. The Sankofa Homeschooling Collective here in Washington, D.C. is one of the big Black-led, it's an all Black-led homeschooling collective here in the DMV region. And one of the things that I have had the opportunity to do was observe them over the last several years. And they literally are doing this homeschooling through real life practical experience. Like there's one sister who's in the homeschooling collective, she's an engineer. So she has a particular expertise in math. So she's the math teacher. Whatever you're not strong in, there's somebody in your network who can do it. Like getting us to think outside of the box. We're so socialized to be dependent on other institutions over things that our ancestors probably looking down at us like, are y'all serious? We did this with our eyes closed. And I'm not suggesting that everything was great prior to, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that everything was wonderful and great, prior to the civil rights movement, because we know certainly there were a lot of barriers. But if we do a correct assessment, right? A balanced assessment, a fair assessment, there were some things that we did well.
No, absolutely. Real quick, I got to get this last brother in. We up in the spot. So my brother Rick Hamilton said, so what do you suggest that we replace those SROs, those police officers with? So we remove them, we fill that void with what? What say you?
So I want to be clear that we have not always had police in schools. I'll tell my age. I'm 40. I grew up in the rural South. I didn't have police officers in my school. Maybe some of you others, depending on where you were in the country, but they have not always been in school. So I always ask, what did we do before? And I'm not being flippant, seriously. We are saying to replace the regular presence. We're not saying like, obviously, if there's an emergency in the school, clearly, okay, call an ambulance, call the police. We're talking about there's officers armed with, all kinds of things, literally walking the halls, patrolling in our schools. That's what we're saying, in the regular presence of law enforcement in our schools. And use that money, reshift the money. Have y'all looked at the school budgets and how much they paying for these SROs? Come on, family. We have to shift that money. Oh my goodness. We have to shift that money to services and support by hiring. We're talking about mentoring. Why not hire mentors in the school? Why not hire more counselors? Counselors that not just sitting behind the desk shoveling papers or typing on a computer, but literal counselors who know how to de-escalate from a loving perspective if she ain't got a gun on her. She ain't got a uniform on her. She just look like they mama or something, look like they auntie. You see what I'm saying? These are children.
No, absolutely. Oh man.
So I could go on and on.
Yeah.
Last thing I would say, let me just say, this is something I'm passionate about. Last thing I would say, the other thing about having officers in school, they're not trained on childhood development. They literally are still the cops that got their training to deal with people. These are the same cops that we see who deal with our communities and families in our neighborhoods. They're not specially trained in a lot of areas. That's real. They're not specially trained in how to deal with kids. That's why you saw what you saw in Florida just 2 days ago. Thank you, Brother Rasheed. This has been beautiful. Thank you.
This is, we could go on for another hour. I'm telling you.
We really could.
Those of you who had the opportunity to tune into this the virtual mentoring day, hopefully you got a lot out of it. I probably was going to say something that probably we're not going to be politically correct, so I'm not going to say that. But I'm just saying that, listen, what you got here from all of the panelists and my sister Zakiya, man, it's just outstanding. So I want to acknowledge all of you who participated in this event. My auntie, the new brother to our community, Brother Barnett, Mr. Evans, you know how I feel about you. The people behind the scenes that make this happen, media service, Randy, Rory, Brother Carter, DSU, shout out to you all, Griot, just so many people, school districts, so on and so forth. I mean, this can't be the beginning. This can't be the end of this conversation. This is a commencement. This has to go on, right? And not just a conversation, like my sister said, we have to lead to some action, right? And so real quick, 4J, they're taking that lead, right? So it's a local school district here in Eugene. They decided to not use SROs and to put that money somewhere else. So it's starting to work. Now we had to hold them accountable where those money's going into, right?
Yes.
And how is it impacting our babies? And so,
yes,
we're on it. So again, thank you, everybody. We're a few minutes over. God bless. Good night.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.